All right. Hey, Dave, how you doing?
Good, Kyle. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you back. And of course, the co host Will Porter is here as well for people watching video. Will and Dave will have to alternate because I haven't quite figured out how to get the setup all down yet. But, Will, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. How you doing, Kyle? How you doing, Dave?
Good, good.
All right, so we have a bunch of articles here that Dave has written up mostly over the past week. They're all at news.antiwar.com. I'll put the link to that in the show notes page, but everybody should just check out the antiwar.com homepage every morning to see all the things that Dave DeCamp here and Jason Ditz have written up about all the wars happening around the world without the narrative spinning that you get from the mainstream outlets like Reuters or AP. Of course, you should also check out what Will Porter is doing, who's also writing up stories over at RT, and he just has his ANCAP spin. All right, let's start off with this that I thought was pretty huge news, but also is kind of a little bit of a perplexing story where there's a report in the New York Times, so it seems to me like an official leak, that the U.S. is preparing a cyber attack against Russia over the SolarWinds hack. And so, they go in the article and they say it's supposed to be clandestine and all of that, but here they're openly saying it. So, Dave, I guess what details do we know about the planned cyber attack, and do we know anything about why it was leaked to the New York Times?
My guess why it was leaked. It's not really a secret that the Biden administration has been planning this pretty much since the SolarWinds hack happened. It was discovered in December of last year. Even in the transition period, Biden officials were threatening retaliation and were threatening attacks on Russia's cyber infrastructure, as they call it. But yeah, it's strange that it was leaked. It's tough to say why. The only reason I could think is because I want Russia to know it's them when it happens, if it does happen. Or maybe it's a message they want to send to the New York Times readers that this administration isn't going to roll over for Russia like they claim Trump did, even though Trump was incredibly hawkish on Russia. But the officials, this is David Sanger, who it's his sources, so keep that in mind. But they said that the first major move, they call it, is expected within the next 3 weeks. This was published on Sunday. And it's going to be like a series of attacks on the cyber infrastructure. And it's apparently it's strange because the quote is that it's intended to be evident to Putin and his intelligence services, but not the wider world. But telling the New York Times makes it pretty evident. So yeah, the details of what they're actually going to do, it's tough to say. But and Russia responded to it on Tuesday. They said that obviously that they were alarmed by it, and they said it would be, a international cyber crime, I believe was the way that they put it. And they deny responsibility for the SolarWinds hack, and there's no evidence. There's really no evidence that Russia was responsible. When the story first broke in December, the New York Times, David Sanger, and plenty of people in Congress and other media outlets blamed Russia immediately. In January, a group of U.S. intelligence agencies, FBI, DNI, I believe the CIA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, NSA, they released a statement that said the hack was likely Russian in origin, and they didn't provide any evidence, and they included the word likely. So it's not exactly, who knows? Just the fact that even the intelligence services had to say it was only likely Russia, it just shows that I don't think that they have evidence at all that it was Russia. And you'll see in a lot of these stories, they'll be like, oh, it's just like the DNC hack, the Russian DNC hack in 2016. Well, there's also never was really evidence that Russia did that. So everything is just based on all these other lies. Maybe not lies, but the way I look at it, the way I write, is that the onus is on them to prove that Russia was responsible. Russia could be doing these things, but I'm not going to take the word of these anonymous officials and David Sanger.
Yeah. I found it interesting having your article about the password apparently was SolarWinds 123, and that had been
Yeah.
posted online. So I guess there's I think a perception from people who don't know anything about cybersecurity and things that it would take a Russian hacker or a North Korean hacker or, a Chinese hacker who's got all the time and resources to hack into the Pentagon website, or, whatever website it is that they're claiming they're trying to hack, or whatever they're doing, whether it's the DNCs. And a lot of times these are very simple operations that, I mean, I'm sure that there's a possibility that like teenagers could figure out this kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they're just posting it online. I remember when I was reading Snowden's memoir, he has in there how he was able to get like into some US nuclear like websites and stuff like that because it was just open right on the website of how to do that. This was when he was a teenager. He called him and let him know that, like, hey, it wasn't anything nefarious. But yeah, just I don't know. It doesn't take a real cyber sleuth to figure this out. Now, Will, anything to add there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you guys might be familiar with the cybersecurity analyst Jeffrey Carr. He's talked about a lot about how it's almost impossible to attribute like these kind of high level hacks to decide who did it, especially when we've seen in like the WikiLeaks and stuff, we've seen how the CIA can kind of like fake fingerprints and make it look like somebody else is doing something. So when they're saying that like, oh, highly likely Russia did it, I'm inherently skeptical about that kind of stuff. And then especially when we start seeing that, oh yeah, the password was SolarWinds 123 and was posted to GitHub and all this stuff, it's you start to get pretty doubtful of the certain ironclad claims of Russian involvement. However, I also wanted to ask you, Dave. You mentioned also there was another recent hack that on Microsoft on their servers, I think their email servers, that has been pretty quickly been blamed on China. And I'm wondering, had you seen anything about is the Biden administration considering a similar response to that intrusion?
I haven't seen anything really besides this New York Times report that said that kind of said that they were weighing options on how to respond to that, but it didn't really say that the Biden administration has blamed China yet. So it was a hack on Microsoft email servers, and apparently it could have affected some defense contractors, military contractors, and small businesses and local governments. And Microsoft blamed it on China. They released, which is strange. It's kind of weird. It's the same way that the SolarWinds hack was discovered. It was discovered by FireEye, a private company, but they actually didn't even blame Russia right up front. So it is kind of strange that Microsoft just says, "Oh, it's these Chinese hackers." And there is more stuff in the news about it. I got to kind of follow up on it, but I'm sure that if the U.S. hasn't blamed China for it at this point, but yeah, it's another kind of big hack that's in the news. And I mean, yeah. So I'm not sure how far that's going to go. They're not making as big a deal about it as they did when the SolarWinds hack happened. I mean, there are senators calling it like a Russian invasion and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it's something to keep an eye on.
I would also imagine at this point too, like just out of financial concerns, it's probably a lot easier to blame Russia, China, Iran, or something, rather than actually have to like take responsibility, and that makes you maybe look like you don't have a secure platform or something like that. And so it could be a pretty good way just to deflect if you're concerned about taking a stock hit or something like that. Even if it turns out later not to have been them, you could be like, oh well, it had the hallmarks of a Russian thing, and that that's just as good as proof enough to convict them in the current court that we have. One thing you point out there, Dave, and I think it might be the case that this was meant for the readers of the New York Times, because Biden pretended that Trump was soft on Russia, and he took office and then extended the New START treaty. And so to, I guess, maintain that both of those narratives are true, he has to do something that looks tough. And so my concern is that's where we're getting some of this stuff. And also you have a story written up here about U.S. flying bombers over the Baltic regions in a message to Russia. And this seemed like a pretty aggressive move to me to fly right over the capitals of the Baltic states. I mean, if you look at a map of where the Baltic states are, this is flying on Russia's border. I can't imagine what would happen if there was, a Russian bomber flying, just outside of the U.S. somewhere, like over a Mexican city or, along the East Coast or something. This seems very provocative.
Yeah, it definitely is. These bombers, they're stationed in Norway now. They were just deployed there. It's the first time that the U.S. has bombers deployed in Norway, and it's part of the U.S. Focus on, besides the Baltic region, also the Arctic. They want to increase their military footprint in the Arctic to confront Russia, and Norway is a good base to do it. And then, I believe there was a similar flight in the Baltic region last year by U.S. bombers, but I don't think that they passed over the states like they did this time. And then if you look at the Baltic Sea, they have Russia has a base in Kaliningrad, which is kind of separate from the mainland Russia or whatever you call it, and it's surrounded by NATO states. It's next to Poland, which is where the U.S. recently established a permanent military presence. That was the Trump administration that did that, the one that was soft on Russia. It's funny because they did that. I think that was part of they were trying to explain the Germany troop drawdown. Trump wanted to bring like 12,000 troops out of about 35,000. The number's always a little different every time I read it. It's either 34,000 or we have 36,000 troops in Germany. And part of the way to justify that, his White House, the Trump administration said, oh, we're moving the troops closer to Russia's border, and they made this permanent deal with Poland, but now Biden's reversing the Germany drawdown. So now we just keep troops in Germany, and we'll add some more troops to Poland and Latvia and Lithuania and those countries too.
Right.
So
it was crazy how much during the Trump administration, anything he did. So if he was, withdrawing troops from Germany, that was a giveaway to Russia, even if he put those troops closer to the Russian border. Will, anything else on Russia before we move on to China here?
I think we can move on. That's about all I had to ask about the threatened cyber attack.
Dave, you got this one written up from like a week ago, but I thought it was like a good place to kind of start our conversation on China, which is the US Indo-Pacific Command is seeking $27 billion to face China. Crazy that, during the middle of the pandemic and Americans are struggling, to get little checks from the government, they're just going to go and ask for an additional $27 billion with no shame. It's not like, hey, we want to buy one less aircraft carrier in 5 years or something. We're going to repurpose that money. No, they want additional money. But it looks like they're going to do a pretty serious buildup over there. I saw at Reuters today that they were talking about ground-based offensive weapons in the Western Pacific, and you have another article about how Germany is going to sail a warship into the South China Sea, and I'm sure this has a lot to do with the U.S. So, Dave, what's going on with the U.S. getting more hostile towards China, especially in the South China Sea region?
Yeah, I mean, everything is moving in the direction of China and Asia and building up the military there and alliances. And so the 27 billion that was requested by Indo-Pacific Command, which, is the military command that oversees operations in the region. It used to be called Pacific Command, but the Trump administration changed the name to the Indo-Pacific, so it includes, the Indian Ocean in that area. But it's 27 billion that they want for the next 5 years between 2022 and 2027, and it's a big ask on top of the funding that they already get. And one of the main things on the wish list is a missile defense system for Guam. That's been we've been hearing about that for a few years now, but probably the most provocative request out of that package is this: they want to set up a missile system along the first island chain, which is talked for the islands like just south of Japan, and it goes down to Indonesia and I believe the Philippines and stuff. But yeah, they want to set up like a series of long-range missiles in that area, and that like they just want to surround China with more missiles. And you mentioned the South China Sea. This is another thing is that the U.S., their European allies, and NATO, they're all following the U.S. to this region of the world. And one of the groups that the Biden administration wants to increase kind of cooperation with is the Quad, which it's like an informal alliance, or they call it a dialogue. It's the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia. And this Friday, they're holding their first ever like summit. Biden is going to meet with them and stuff. But yeah, these are just all examples of how everything's going this way. The Indo-Pacific Command wants more money. Biden's been sailing warships to the South China Sea to challenge China's claims there, just like Trump did, just like Obama did. Sailing ships through the Taiwan Strait. France did some maneuvers through the South China Sea. Germany's planning to do some. The UK's planning to do some. NATO wants to work more with this Quad group, and yeah, it's dangerous stuff because I mean you look at India. India was a little hesitant to kind of work with these Quad countries militarily. They didn't want to send the wrong message to China, but last summer there was that border dispute. About 20 Indian soldiers died, and tensions are pretty high over there. And the U.S. since then they signed a military pact with India to increase the sharing of satellite data. So right now the U.S. is helping India surveil the Chinese troops on the border there. So I mean, how if something happens there, then it's a proxy war. It's a U.S.-China proxy war because the U.S. will be backing India. So I mean, it's just really dangerous stuff, and there's nobody really is opposed to it or really talks about it. But I mean, people should be very opposed to giving the military $27 billion to encircle China with missiles, but we don't hear about it too much. And yeah, it's just really dangerous stuff. And they're actually apparently it was confirmed today. Blinken, Secretary of State, and Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, they're meeting with top-level Chinese diplomats in Alaska. They picked Alaska because it's like a halfway point between Beijing and Washington, apparently. So, and it's kind of China, I think, is more hoping for a reset. They've been calling for better relations while the Biden administration is talking all sorts of shit about China. So hopefully something comes out of these talks, but I don't really have much faith.
Well, I'll let you follow up if you got anything.
Yeah. I was gonna just as a point of clarification. You write about how this requested spending package is part of this thing called the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, and I was just curious: is there anything else that we should know about this initiative beyond like the missile defense network and all the stuff in the first island chain? Is that mostly what it is? Is just requesting beefed up defense or offense spending? Is there any other component to that initiative that is worth talking about?
Not that I should kind of research it more, but those are like the two big things that jumped out at me from it. And there is a Pacific Deterrence Initiative that was approved for the 2021 NDAA, which I think went towards Guam. So it's something that started about a year or two ago. Right. But yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, there's tons of aspects to it. It's a lot of money. Different radar systems and stuff like that. But yeah, the Guam defense and the missile system is the two big things.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I had thought too. And yeah, I also, there's a lot of reading I need to do on that too. As far as I understand, they are trying to like model it after what they call the European Defense or Deterrence Initiative, which is it's its own thing that's been standing for a while. So
yeah, they started the European one after the coup in Ukraine and the Crimea annexation. So they're kind of modeling it off that.
which which look how that's gone in the past 6 years now, 7 years now. It's only we have more tensions with Russia. It's I guess it's always portrayed that these are supposed to be like de-escalatory somehow, like if the US is able to assert its dominance, then China's just gonna like let up eventually, that we're not going to have to constantly pour billions and billions and trillions of dollars to constantly combat China. I mean, there's probably some Republicans who believe that, but the idea is that eventually, like, they just bat down, and that's obviously not the case, and we're gonna have to spend more and more money. There's a pretty good article last week in Responsible Statecraft by Bob Perry, or not Bob Perry, Mark Perry, and he explains that there was a lot of willingness within the Pentagon to have to concede that because of the pandemic and everything, that they would have to cut their budget a little bit. The Biden administration is going full ahead with spending here, and so I guess I just don't see any way that they're going to bat down. The political will doesn't seem to be there. The Republicans seem to really be pushing this idea that Biden is owned by China, and I think is going to have a very kind of similar China policy to Trump's Russia policy, where everything he does is going to be portrayed as not hawkish enough, but it's all going to be very aggressive. Dave, anything else on China?
Yeah, I had one last thing. Dave, you and I have both written about this, and Kyle and I know we've talked about this in the show a bit. Biden right now is doing this policy review of U.S.-China policy. He's got this guy, Eli Ratner, like heading up this task force. He's a pretty big China hawk, so I pretty much think I know what to expect there. But I'm just curious, do you expect any significant change to come out of that policy review at all, or is this just like same business as usual, picking right up where Trump left off with his administration?
I mean, I think what's going to come out of it is that they're probably going to try to establish a new military base or something in the region, or just say, okay, let's approve this PDI, this $27 billion. I don't think there's any. I mean, they're reviewing all sorts of stuff, so sometimes these reviews they don't really mean much. But I mean, I just don't see it ending with them not saying let's put more bases in Asia. They want to revive. They want to add. I forget the number fleet, but the Navy is looking to add another numbered fleet in the region, because right now
it'll be the first fleet.
Yeah, I believe it's the 7th. I get my fleets mixed up. It's the 7th fleet that's based in Japan. Do you guys know?
Yeah, I believe so.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, because they do all like the South China Sea stuff and the Taiwan Strait, and they want kind of another fleet for all that, because kind of in the more Indo region of the Indo-Pacific. So yeah, I could see that coming out of this, either if they're going to put it in Australia, or because a lot of these Southeast Asian countries, they don't really want to get involved in this. They don't want to show China that, like, I've seen people say Singapore might be the place for the new base, but I don't think Singapore would go for it. So yeah, we'll see. But I just see, like you said, this guy Eli Renner. I mean, he's like the ultimate China hawk. He worked for the Center for New American Security, and he wrote an op-ed last year that said Trump has been weak on China. So it might even be worse. It's probably going to be worse. I mean, we're on the trajectory that Trump set, and Trump wasn't in Pompeo. They weren't as good at, like, Blinken and Biden. They'll be good at building these alliances and getting these countries to cooperate more.
Yeah.
Pompeo was horrible as a diplomat. Blinken scares the shit out of me because he is basically Pompeo, but he seems more skilled and
slick,
polite. Yeah.
Yeah, I really think Danny Sturgeon wrote about this quite a bit at antiwar.com, about Pompeo kind of thinking he's a mafia guy. And I think that only goes so far. Like, I think he really thought he could, like, bully people around and, like, expected, for them to kiss the ring and stuff. One thing, I guess, with Biden that could be different for the Quad alliance, at least, that wouldn't have been a concern at all under Trump, is that the government in India is pretty right-wing and nasty, especially towards the Muslim minority and other ethnic minorities there. Have you seen any pressure at all on the Biden administration to, like, not be more connected to the Modi government. And also there's other problems. Like I know the Indians were pretty close to buying the S-400 missile system from Russia, which was a huge dispute with Turkey. And I mean, we also have the Philippines where Duterte seems fairly reckless and can't decide 1 minute into the nets what he wants his relationship with the U.S. to be. So, I mean, is there any concern in the like Biden administration or from anyone that you've seen like close to power about like the kind of governments we're getting involved with in this region or anything like that?
No, which is interesting because you think about, well, for India, I know there's been these farmers have been protesting, and that's been a big deal. But it does kind of show you the way the media kind of steers like all the stuff going on in India we don't really hear about, but it's anything in China, even if it's not confirmed.
Or Myanmar,
yeah. And like you said about the Philippines, I mean, Duterte, you know, they have these brutal crackdowns on drug dealers and stuff. They kill extrajudicial like executions and stuff. And but yeah, no, you don't hear much about that. That is a good point. I wonder if that will become a thing if we start cooperating more with India or the Philippines. Right. And Duterte, he knows, he has been saying that if the U.S. wants a permanent deal to station troops there, that they have to pay. He keeps saying that the U.S. has to pay. So yeah, and Myanmar is something I think to keep an eye on because there's been a lot of protests there, and after the coup in February, and people have been getting killed by the military, and Biden sanctioned them, and they're talking a tough game on Myanmar. So hopefully it doesn't go beyond the sanctions that they already put in place. But with this administration and them focusing on Asia, I wouldn't be surprised if we really get involved over there in Myanmar.
Will, anything?
No, we can move on.
All right. Yeah, the last thing I was just going to note is the only public official I've ever seen confronted over their possible relationship with the Modi government has been Tulsi Gabbard, which is kind of interesting because our vice president is also from some Indian descent, and I haven't heard her ever confronted with, you know, any possible, you know, concern of being, you know, too favorable to that government. And not that this is exactly what you were writing up in this article here, Dave, but I think the most disturbing thing to me that you had all last week was this article about Kamala Harris taking the lead on foreign policy, specifically with Israel. But it sounds like the White House wants her to be you know, up on foreign policy. I guess, you know, for a vice president, she doesn't really have any foreign policy history at all, so that could be part of it. But what's going on here?
Yeah, so she spoke with Netanyahu, and I know Pence talked with Netanyahu a lot. I'm not sure how, maybe you guys know better than me, what the history of vice presidents talking to the leader of Israel is, but it's not a surprise, really, that the Trump administration, that Pence talked to him a lot. But yeah, she, you know, talked to Netanyahu, reaffirmed the U.S.'s unwavering commitment to Israel, said she was upset about the ICC, the International Criminal Court, investigating Israeli war crimes. But apparently there was a report from Politico that said they're kind of, Biden's in favor of it too, apparently, of her kind of taking the lead more world leaders. She also spoke with Australia's prime minister, French president, and the Canadian prime minister. So, I mean, it's not really like a secret. Like, it is the thing people are joke about how, oh, when is Kamala Harris going to, you know, take over? But I mean, Biden is 78 years old, and if he, there's a chance that they might just run her for the second term. You know, he's going to be 82 then. Like, it's not so it kind of makes sense for them to want her to do stuff like this because she doesn't have any experience. But yeah, it is scary. Oh man, she probably be as bad as you can be.
Right. Well,
on foreign policy.
she doesn't. I've never seen her say anything publicly on foreign policy that suggests to me that she really understands anything, and not
Yeah.
even like an anti-war stance. But Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama, let's see, Mike Flynn, like people like that could talk on foreign policy and like they understand what's going on. When she was like confronted on the statement she made about Tulsi Gabbard, like she couldn't even begin to explain like her claims on who was on whose side and all that. And decent hots could do that. And so my concern with Kamala is who, depending on who's around her, she could go for absolutely anything, which is quite concerning. Will, anything on this?
Yeah, I mean, she is like the worst combination of like no knowledge and horrible instincts. Like all the positions she staked out are just terrible, especially on Israel. I mean, she like I believe she sided with the Republicans when if you guys probably remember Obama's UN envoy didn't even vote for a Security Council resolution to condemn the settlements, but just abstained on the vote. And Harris joined the Republicans in condemning that and like calling to rescind U.S. funding to the UN, which I'm not a huge fan of the UN, but for that reasoning, it's horrible. But yeah, she's just demonstrated the worst possible instincts on everything, and spent her whole career as a prosecutor, as a defending cops and stuff, or So I don't think that's setting her up too well for a career as a diplomat or a foreign policy person. But they're seemingly trying to rush her into that. I don't know. The Politico story you mentioned, they like frame it as just in case Biden doesn't run again the next race. But I wonder if they're worried about something happening before that. Like you said, he is very old. He appears very weak and doddering in a lot of his appearances.
Yeah, no, that has to be a concern. Dave, I want to move on talking a little bit more about Iran now, although look, if you're talking about Israeli influence over Iran policy, that's certainly pushing the U.S. towards a more hostile position with Iran. You have this write-up here. Biden extends 1995 emergency executive order that sanctions Iran. Are you really telling me that we're sanctioning Iran today for something that we're sanctioning them for in 1995?
Yeah. From Clinton. Yeah, he extended this executive order. It sanctions the petroleum industry. And it's interesting because this kind of shows, I used to kind of falsely be under the impression that Obama lifted all U.S. sanctions on Iran, but that wasn't true. He didn't even really come close, from what I understand. This has been renewed through every president, this executive order. And so this is kind of typical. It's not really that much of a surprise, but I mean, if you look at it, it's so ridiculous. I mean, he said that it's on the grounds that Iran is a national security threat, is like this huge threat to the U.S., which is just so ridiculous. And what actually was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday, Tuesday. The State Department sanctioned 2 Iranian officials, 2 IRGC interrogators, which is just a sign that they're in no hurry to return to the nuclear deal, to the JCPOA, if they're still doing this Trump era stuff of kind of meaningless sanctions. Because these 2 IRGC guys, it was for like alleged human rights violations during the protests in 2019, but the IRGC was designated as a terrorist organization by Trump. So if you're in the IRGC, you're already sanctioned. And they said it was a travel like a travel restriction. They can't enter the country. Well, they already can't enter the country because of the terror designation. So what's the point? This is just more Trump era, just sanction them to sanction them. It's just completely, maybe because they're getting shit from the Republicans and some hawkish Democrats about being soft on Iran because they say they want to return to the nuclear deal, but they're not making any effort to do so. And this is just sending the wrong signal.
Yeah, I mean, Biden's people keep over and over again saying how that, we're ready to, return. I mean, they keep saying that, Iran must return to all of its commitments, but they do keep paying lip service to this idea of diplomacy with Iran. But yeah, we just keep seeing the same, maximum pressure thing. I don't see much, difference between, it's kind of similar to the China policy. It's like there's not a lot of noticeable difference so far, at least, in Biden's approach. to Iran and China than Trump's.
Yeah, I mean, including other things too. Like we have flying these B-52 bombers to the Middle East. Dave, I want to ask if you know how much this cost. It has to be an insane amount of money. And explain to people exactly what's happening here. These bombers are not like deploying to the Middle East; they're just flying there and then back home.
Yeah, they just fly to the Middle East and then they come back home. Just to I mean, just to stoke tensions, I guess, and show Iran that we have bombers. Yeah, it's just such an unnecessary, like you said, probably super expensive maneuver that started. It became a regular thing at the end of the Trump administration in last November, and it happened a couple times a month. This was the second. This happened. Was it Sunday? I believe, and it was the second bomber mission of the Biden administration. They didn't do it in February, but this time the bombers were photographed with Israeli jets when they flew. They were escorted through Israeli airspace by these jets. But yeah, it's just another sign. His Iran policy is identical to Trump's because they have all these sanctions on there. They're adding more sanctions. They're sending these bombers, and they're trying to get Iran to talk. That's exactly what Trump did. They just but they say that they want the deal, but they're not doing anything differently right now. And so yeah, I don't have much faith in the Iran deal being revived.
Yeah, there was just yesterday there was a bipartisan letter, I think, from like 140 lawmakers, and they're being really hawkish. It was 70 Democrats, I think. All the same crap we've heard for years now, that, oh yeah, we have to have deals that address Iran's ballistic missile program and support for Hezbollah. And they used, of course, the phrase malign activity or whatever in the region, just the same slogans and talking points. But it does seem like, yeah, the legislature is really behind that hawkish push as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think there was something in responsible statecraft that apparently AIPAC pushed that letter.
Okay. That makes sense.
Which isn't a surprise. But yeah, I mean, they just repeat this nonsense. I got to look up his name. It was some senator that I didn't hear of, but there's been the Houthis have been, launching drones inside Saudi Arabia because they've been at war with them for almost 6 years now. And there was a senator who blamed these attacks on Biden's Iran policy, repeating some nonsense that some FDD guy or AIPAC guy told him. It's just so absurd. Like the idea, ignoring the almost 6-year war, the bombing campaign and stuff. What's his name? I got to find his name. Bill Hagerty. Yeah, I never heard of him. He's a Republican from Tennessee. But he said, yet another missile strike against Saudi Arabia today with all the hallmarks of an Iranian-backed attack. It seems Biden's desire to give Tehran sanctions relief is emboldening the mullahs to escalate their aggression. It's just insane. It's like somebody, handed him, here, say this. And it's just such a joke. Like, I have no idea about what's actually happening in that region.
Yeah. Just to add to the letter and lawmakers here, we also had that AIPAC letter, I guess, being backed by Senate Foreign Relations Chair Bob Menendez and Lindsey Graham. So a coalition of the absolute worst. And I said this on the last show when I was talking to Connor Freeman. The thing that Biden could do is just stand up and say, hey, this deal prevents Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. Everybody has been shrieking about how terrified they are about Iran getting a nuclear bomb, so we're getting back in the deal to make sure they don't get the bomb. Everybody is happy. And just take a hard, firm line stance on it. But rather, he seems convinced that he has to bend to the will of the Houthis. And Matt Blumenthal just wrote up this article about how Biden's new deputy Iran envoy is this guy who wrote a whole book about how great sanctions against Iran worked, and
Oh yeah.
this guy's name Richard Nephew. He like just brags about how he drove up inequality in Iran. He said that the goal of the sanctions was to make the common people poor and the elites rich. Like, that's the exact opposite of what they claim sanctions are for. But they're trying to delegitimize the government. So I don't have much hope for what Biden's policy is going to be on Iran. I guess I had hoped with Biden coming in, the one thing he would do right is return to the Iran nuclear deal. But as you said, Dave, you don't think that's going to happen. I don't know. Anything else on Iran? Before we wrap up here at this point, like, what needs to happen? Because I don't think Israel or Saudi Arabia necessarily wants the U.S. to go to war with Iran. They certainly don't want to, go to war with Iran themselves. It would be, I think, pretty brutal for both of those states. So what's the plan here? Where do they go forward with Iran? Because I don't think Iran's going to be like, oh, well, after you just backed out and ruined that deal, we're going to sign on to another agreement where we give up all of our missiles.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. Iran, they were signaling again that they would engage in kind of informal talks with the U.S. It's brokered by the EU, but again, Biden's sending all the wrong signals. So I don't really. It's really just on Biden to make a move to lift some sanctions or something, or. But yeah, it's tough to say. And if Israel and Saudi Arabia really want a war, I don't think so now. But I mean, Israel and the Saudis and the UAE and Bahrain, they're apparently in talks to build an anti-Iran military alliance, which isn't a surprise. And that's kind of that was a big aspect of the normalization deals. Saudi Arabia hasn't normalized with Israel yet, but they've been cooperating for a while, and that'll happen eventually. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think Biden wants to get sucked into another major war in the Middle East. I mean, he's not. His policy could if he keeps up this Iran policy, it could lead to another war if he keeps bombing these Iraqi militias. So I don't know. I mean, if Biden, I don't think he wants another major war in the region, but so he just has to make a move to return to the deal and get Israel and Saudi Arabia to go along with it without bombing Iran, without Israel bombing Iran. So yeah, it's tough to say what's going to happen, but I don't know. I mean, anything can happen. I don't think Trump really wanted a war with Iran. I mean, when he killed Soleimani, it looked like he did, but his policy, I mean, he created this powder keg in the region, and it's still there. And I don't know. The smart thing to do would be to return to the deal, even from Biden's perspective. Like, not that I agree with the things he wants to do, which is move everything to Asia and keep like these small, limited drone wars and limited engagements in these Middle East countries. But I mean, returning to the Iran deal would be, if that's what you want to do, that's what you should do. You should revive the deal and just, ease tensions in that region. But who knows?
What do you think, Will?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with what Dave just said. Like Biden right now is sending all the wrong signals, making all the wrong moves. If he wants, like he says, to revive this deal, and yeah, he is sitting on this powder keg that he may not want to start a new war in the region, but we may stumble into that when we're doing these Syria strikes and Iraq strikes, stuff like that. So there's a lot of danger here of escalation. And it doesn't seem like he's moving in the right direction at all. It seems like he's, doing the very opposite of what he could do to tamp down on that.
Right. Yeah. There was a really great interview on this. Scott Horton interviewed Peter Van Buren recently about like the diplomatic stuff, and Peter was a veteran of the State Department. And I think he summed it up pretty well, saying that Biden pooped the bed on the Iran game back in the Iran nuclear deal. And that's kind of where we're at now, where it seems like he's dug himself into so much of a hole. There's so much political pressure pushing the other way that he would have to like make such a strong, firm stance on it, and I don't think the man has the constitution for it anymore. That doesn't strength. It does not seem to be what's radiating from Joe Biden. So, Dave, Will, thanks so much for coming back on the show today. We will, I think I'll put this out a day early. I'll put it out on Thursday just because we're recording it a day early and it's all pretty fresh news. But, Will, go ahead, tell people where they could find your work, and then Dave.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Dave, thanks again for coming on. If people want to find my stuff, the best way to do it, probably I collect it all at my Twitter account. That's at the Will Porter. That's probably the best place to check.
Yeah, read antiwar.com in the news section, and follow me on Twitter at DeCamp Dave, and subscribe to our newsletter and follow the news. There's a lot of it.
All right, thanks. And I'm at Kyle Anslone _ libertarianinstitute.org, and then I work on the viewpoints at antiwar.com. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.